are you guys?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy Saturday. Good to have you here.
So when I was 16, I was part of this group at my church where we would go to people's homes and tell them the gospel. And it wouldn't be just anyone's home, it wouldn't be like random people. We would go to people who had visited the church recently. And so I was in the youth group, and there was only a couple of us in the youth group doing this, and we were assigned all the kids that had come to youth group recently. So we're going around doing this. It's really awkward. I don't enjoy it, but I'm really excited about my faith, and I want to do it well, and this is one of those things.
You said you were the youth group hero.
I was kind of the youth
That's
group
how you describe yourself.
hero guy.
Yeah.
And so we were pulling up to this one guy's house, and I'm looking at the card that he had filled out. That's how we knew where he lived. And I look at it, and it's Adam. I know Adam. Like, Adam and I, we skated together. We built skate ramps. I once did a sleepover at his house where we got his brother to sneak us out so we could teepee other people's houses. Like, Adam and I had some history. And so the girl I was with, I tell her, like, look, I got this one. I want to make it, as least awkward as possible. And we come out, and Adam's outside of his house, and so we're hanging out on the sidewalk, and we're chatting, and how we're trained to kind of break the seal of the conversation is with a question. And the question is, you've probably heard this question before. You go, Adam, if you were to die today, just tragically die, but you're dead, and now you're up in heaven, right? Here's heaven, and there's a gate, and God is there. And he's standing there, and he says, Adam, like, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? And of course, this is a trick question, because you're supposed to say something like, well, I've been a pretty good person, like I've done enough good things. I'm not one of those people that deserve to be down there. And so, Adam just says, like, I think God would know I'm legit. And so at that point, we open the Bible and we say, can I read you some scriptures? And so there's 5 scriptures that we were trained to read to the person. And they're all in Romans. You guys familiar with these? And one's in chapter 3, one's in chapter 5, one's in chapters, I don't know. And so there's 5 in Romans, and you go through them, and it's like the code. It's like the secret code to get into heaven. And so you go through it. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Wages of sin is death. Gift of God is eternal life. You get through all of them, and then when you're done, you seal the deal with a prayer. And at this point, it's actually pretty easy, I found, because you just told them, like, look, you're not getting to heaven. Here's the code. And, like, do you want us to pray the prayer? Like, we get this taken care of right now, and you don't have to deal with that if you die. And so he prayed the prayer. We do it, and I'm like, okay. And we're standing there at a sidewalk, and it's awkward. And I'm like, they didn't train me how to do this part. And I remember someone once saying, like, angels are celebrating in heaven. So I'm like, Adam, angels are celebrating in heaven. And I said, see you at school tomorrow. And we took off, and it was really awkward. Like, afterwards, Adam didn't talk to me about it. I didn't talk to him about it. We didn't know how to talk about it. And I just started to wonder, like, what's so special about these 5 verses in Romans that pulled out of the book and strung together create this formula? And if they're so special, why did Paul write a whole letter, right? Like, why not just those 5 verses? That would have been a lot easier. And so actually, I thought to myself, right?
That's a really good point.
I wanted to know, like, what else is in this book, because that was an awkward situation. Adam doesn't seem any different. I don't even want to talk to him anymore. Like, this is like, so what else is in this book? So I'm reading through Romans. Have you guys read through Romans? Romans is, there's a lot of weird stuff in that book. Paul's talking about Adam, not my friend Adam, the first Adam, the human, and how he screwed things up. And that part I got. Like, I got that in Sunday school and stuff. That's the problem. That's why we're in trouble, is Adam. But then he also talks about the faith of Abraham a lot. He talks about the laws of Moses. He talks about Esau and Isaac and the heart of Pharaoh, and he's quoting from all these Old Testament prophets, and it's just like all over the place. And I'm like, what is going on here? It's like Paul writing this letter is he's so embedded in this story of these characters and these plots, and it's so in him, and he's wrestling with it, and it's all coming out on these pages, and I'm just like, I think I know about these stories. We looked at these in Sunday school a little bit, but I don't know what he's talking about. I began to think of the Bible as, well, if I don't understand it, what you do is you pull out the verses you can't understand, you string them together, and you find the formulas. And so this is kind of how I was trained, and so I actually have some slides, if you have those. This is kind of like how to navigate the Old Testament. This was kind of what was going on in my mind, if I was honest about it. Okay, so the first slide is the creation story. This is important to make sure you don't become an evolutionist. So we got that one. The next one is Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Forget about it. Stay away from those. Next one, Old Testament stories. This is a big group of things. There's good children's church material in here, but there's also some weird laws. Just be careful. Okay. Moving on. Psalms. Okay, Psalms. This is a great book, right? Psalms. There's lots of worship songs come from there. If you need a devotional time, go to the Psalms. You'll find something good. That was a go-to book. Next one, Proverbs. Great advice in here. Good for type A personalities. Next one, Ecclesiastes. Feeling moody? Try this book. And then next, Song of Solomon. You know what I'm talking about. You've been there. Next one. All right, so Isaiah, Jeremiah, these are crazy books, Hebrew poetry, but there's some good Christmas stuff in there. And then after that, what do we got? Lamentations, Downer book. Maybe try the Psalms. That's a better one. And then we get into the Minor Prophets, I believe. No, Daniel. Don't forget about Daniel. Yeah, that guy's rad. Cool dudes, great story of faith, but there's weird visions of beasts, and let other people argue about old-time stuff, end-time stuff. And then the Minor Prophets. The Minor Prophets guys are just smaller versions of the crazier Isaiah books, except for Jonah. Jonah's a rad one. That's a story people like. Just watch out for the ending. It's a bit of a downer. And when all else fails, preach from Romans. So that was kind of my mental map of the Bible. This thing is falling off. Sorry.
You're right.
That was my my mental map of the Bible, because I was just trying to make sense of it, and can get kind of strange really fast. The acronym that we used, Bible, Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth, it was this perspective of it's this instruction book that fell from the sky. And what eventually happened was, while I was extremely committed to God, and extremely committed to the way of Jesus and to the church, I'm in, I want this, more times than not, coming to the Bible would just make it harder for me. It just made things confusing. And it became a chore that I just didn't want to deal with if I didn't have to. And so practically, I was becoming a post-Bible Christian. And I was committed to God, but the Bible felt crazy.
I was not a youth group hero. When puberty set in, I got my first skateboard. And my first skateboard had a barbarian holding a severed head standing on a pile of corpses that he had hacked to pieces. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So there's no way I'm going to go to youth group. I grew up, my family did attend church, but they definitely didn't, some mic assistance there. I didn't, John and I had really different growing up relationships to the Bible. And I didn't read it, and I was familiar enough with churchianity from, our family attending church. But seriously, the moment I got my first skateboard at 11, and then it was over. And I was sneaking out of the house on Saturday nights to wake up at my friend's house so I wouldn't have to fight with my parents about going to church in the morning. I ended up at a skateboard park when I was 16, and actually told part of the story last year. It's an outreach ministry to skateboarders, where I became a follower of Jesus. It's where John and I actually met a number of years later. Mm-hmm. And there I was introduced to Jesus, and stories about him and his teachings that were Jesus is amazing. You don't have to be religious at all. Just hear stories about him. He's unbelievable. And so I began to become interested again in Jesus. Nothing else and anything associated with him, but with him. And those stories and those teachings about Jesus worked on me for years. And when I was 19, almost 20, I became a follower of Jesus. So one thing I noticed as I began to read about Jesus in the Bible was that he talked about the Bible a lot. And so as opposed to having some kind of, puzzling Bible, I just had the extremely bewildering Bible of, I'm down for Jesus, but WTF, what is going on in this book? Like there's Jesus, and then there's all these sex scandals and all the violence and the blood, and what does this have to do with anything? Oh, but then there's the Psalms. That's cool. I actually like the Psalms. That was beautiful. But really, I didn't understand what on earth these had to do with each other, and I didn't have a framework for taming these books, to domesticate their weirdness. But I didn't sit in my bewilderment very long. I signed up for classes at a local Christian university, and God's mercy towards me. I ended up in a series of classes and with an amazing, wise set of professors. And it wasn't just my view of the Bible that was getting completely reshaped. It was my whole identity, my view of myself in the world, because that's the power that these texts have when you're able to hear them on their own terms. But hearing these texts on their own terms actually takes a lot of work, and a lot of you know what I'm talking about. So I'm in these classes about how to study the Bible, and I'm introduced to the fact that they're literature. They're literature, and they're ancient Jewish literature. And that the way that these books are designed and woven together, and the diversity of types of literature, and the poetry, and the artistry, and the craft that went into these books as communication acts, they're stunningly sophisticated and profound. Then I end up in a series of classes where I'm learning this thing called biblical theology, and it's a way of putting together Christian beliefs not by imposing a system on the Bible, but by learning to read it as a unified story and trace key repeated words and themes that keep coming up, and learning to trace themes like holiness through the narrative arc of the Bible. And then I was like, oh my God, this is changing my life. It was incredible. College blew my mind, and it actually has never stopped. So then I ended up in a whole other series of classes because I was like, I want to learn how to read this thing in the language that it's written in, because this surely can't be the end, and it was not the end of my questions. So then it's like language and culture and history and background, and then I really went for it because I started getting interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and dude, so amazing. And then I ended up in a whole other graduate program diving into the history of the composition and the making of the Bible. And so I walk away from this. It's been 21 years I've been at this, and it's completely reshaped my paradigm of what it means for me to be human, what it means for me to relate to Jesus, and what it means for me to understand him in light of these texts that he said were a unified story leading to him. And when people talk about the strange, I resonate with the bewildering Bible because I experienced that. But it's such a distant memory now. It's kind of like having like your dear closest friend that you know is weird to everybody else, but you know what they're really like. And you know they're deeply misunderstood, and you want to help the world see how awesome your friend is. And that's kind of what I've been doing in classrooms and mostly in local church settings in and around the Portland area. But then John and I met up, and our bewilderment and confusion and our journeys came together.
Yeah, Tim was moving back to Portland. When Tim was out in Madison studying, you were studying with people who didn't necessarily follow Jesus, but navigating this path of I want to be committed to following Jesus while really understanding this book. And we would have these conversations when you came back to town, and I would pepper you with questions. We'd have these good conversations that I really respected. And there were other teachers I was listening to. I was listening to a lot of Tim Keller at that time, who's a great teacher. And I would realize there's a lot here. Like, this is still really beautiful and profound, and I wanted to understand theology. So what I was doing as a job is I was making videos that explain things. I was making cartoons for the internet that explain things. And doing it mostly, a lot of work here in the Valley with companies you've heard of, and then lots of startups that you haven't heard of, and trying to explain, like, why should I care about this thing you're building? And so I was making all these videos. I was getting tired of explaining cloud computing for the 10th time. So I was pitching this idea of, like, why don't we make a YouTube channel that explained theology? For me, it was theology. Like, we don't need to explain the Bible. Let's explain theology. And my working title for the project, do you remember what it was?
Yeah. It's so bad.
It was. I'm glad we didn't use it. I called it Theology is Boring, was the name of the YouTube channel. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, right? Because to me, it had gotten pretty stale, but I knew it could be exciting. And so we started working on that. Like, Tim came and said, well, here's 100 videos I'd like to make. And I was like, awesome. Those are awesome. We started having conversations around the first few, and immediately it was like, oh my goodness, this content is helping me so much as we dialogued, as we wrote, as we began to direct these videos. And so I think there's 3 big paradigms for me that I think helped me go from a Bible that felt confusing, bewildering, disenchanted, to a Bible that became full of life and re-enchanted. And the first one was that the Bible is both human and divine. And in my tradition, you would say that. You would say the Bible is both human and divine, but then you'd kind of wink and say, but it's really divine. And we would try to, smooth off, polish off all the human fingerprints off of this thing. And it was important because this book told us what to do in our life now, how to get to the next life, and like this thing has to be perfect. And so let's get all the humanity out of it. And what happened was I would come to it, and sometimes it just didn't seem divine. Like, sometimes it just felt human. Like, you've experienced that before, I'm sure. You come to it, and you're just like, is this a divine book? And when you come thinking it's supposed to be 100% divine, that's very scandalous. And then you start to wonder, like, oh man, should I even be having this thought? Like, what, am I in trouble? And when we started having these conversations, Tim would talk about the literary structure of the books and the intention of the authors and these themes that ran through, and we were just talking about the humanity of the Bible. And it felt really uncomfortable to me because you don't talk about that. Because you talk about the humanity of the Bible, and now you're one step away from the whole Bible being worthless, and I got to become Buddhist or something. So it was scary, but what happened was very remarkable, is as we talked about and looked at the humanity of the Bible and the beauty, the literary genius and the structure, and as I saw how deep it went and how it was speaking to things that were so deeply connected to me and my questions and to the world and what was going on around, suddenly I would be confronted with its divinity. Like, all of a sudden I'd be looking at it and going, this can't just be a human book. This is more than just a human book. And so, paradoxically, coming to it as a human book and recognizing its humanity helped me, I think, see its divinity for the first time.
This is one of the big paradigm shifts. Our core mission with the resources we're creating is to help people see that the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus. But there's a lot of preloaded assumptions that we come to the Bible with, and one of them, I'm recognizing it more and more, is this very issue right here. I think our inability to see the wedding of human and divine creativity in the biblical text, it actually prevents us from being able to hear the Bible on its own terms. What this speaks to, in my humble opinion, what it speaks to is a couple underlying assumptions that are pervasive in the history of Western Christianity. One of them is our assumption about how God works in the world. We assume that if God's will and purpose is carried forward in the world, it's going to be despite human beings, or without employing their agency in some way. The main problem with that conception is the Bible. If you look at page 1 of the Bible, look at how the nature of the story is set up. It's about God creates this incredible piece of real estate and then wants to share and partner with humans in directing where the ship is going. That's the very nature of the story of the Bible, is the divine-human partnership. And apparently God takes an enormous amount of stock and dignity in human decision-making because exhibit A, human history, you know what I'm saying? So it's actually woven into the heart of the narrative itself that God has chosen to partner with humans in how his purposes and will is carried out through history. Of course, that doesn't go well until Jesus comes, but we'll talk about that in the late afternoon session, right? But another part of it is that it's an impoverished conception that many of us have about how the Spirit is at work. We think that if the Spirit is at work, if God's at work in someone through the Spirit, then that means it minimizes their will or their purpose or their agency. Many of us have a conception when it says the Scriptures are inspired by the Spirit, what it really means is their minds went blank and the authors were just like doing the trance or something. But that's just so there's actually, not only is there no biblical passages that describe the writing of the Bible in that way, there are many passages that do describe the writing of the Bible describe just the opposite type of experience. They describe authors in full possession of their faculties, creating these texts. And so this is a big one, in my opinion. It's about learning to have a much more robust and biblical view of how these texts are a human and divine word, so that what these brilliant human authors communicated is what God wants his people to hear. And that might seem simple when you first hear it, but it's a paradigm shift that many of us need to undergo to, I think, be able to hear the Bible on its own terms.
The second paradigm that was helpful in coming away from a post-Bible Christianity was to see the Bible as literary genius. It's really connected to this first one. And this is a phrase Tim would use all the time, like, oh, these guys are literary geniuses and literary ninjas. Every move is thought out and important. And what's interesting is, like, I've come to expect that and appreciate that in movies, right? Like, I have favorite directors because I know they understand how filmmaking works. Like, they've studied the craft. They've watched tons of their heroes. They know all of the rules. They know when to break the rules. And they can then create a film that fits into this whole history of filmmaking, which then just mesmerizes you and brings you into the story in a unique, powerful way. We get that. We get art, and we get how important just artistic genius is, whether it's in filmmaking or in painting or in literary works. I'd never been told to think of the Bible that way, but as we've done this project, it's amazing how sophisticated this book is. And if you don't want to just argue whether or not it's divine, like, take that off the table. Just put it up to any other work in human history, and it holds its own. It is literary brilliance. And once we started talking about that, I was then looking for it. Like the things I was trained to look for were like, look for the moral tales or look for the lessons. And that's great. That stuff's in there. It's helpful. But I was never told to look for the literary genius and see how the authors are aware of what these stories before them are doing and building off of each other. And once you start looking for it, it's deep. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's a book that you can meditate on your whole life and find pleasant surprises over and over again.
Yeah, this, to me, I think has been one of the most mind-blowing discoveries, but I feel like I make the discovery again every day when I read the Bible. The Bible's very patient with us. It's extremely patient. I've used the analogy in multiple settings, but it's a lot like that scene in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke is on Dagobah, and he's before the sage Master Yoda, but he doesn't know it. He thinks he's just in front of a silly green creature. And of course, Master Yoda knows who he is, but he's patient. He's patient with the silly, ignorant one, right? And he just allows Luke to sit in his ignorance until he has enough experiences with the Master to realize, like, oh my gosh. And so part of the problem is, especially in churchianity, where people are raised on remade versions of the Bible. And so they think that therefore they know the Bible because they've been introduced to the Bible through children's media or whatever. When actually the real literary brilliant version that's sitting there in its pages is patiently waiting to be discovered. And by many of us, it simply never is discovered. And so let's just end that. And that's one of our core convictions and passions, is to help people see how unbelievably sophisticated and profound these narratives are and these poems. They are making a contribution to the human conversation about the most profound questions in the human experience, about death, about life, about loss, about hope, about meaning. And if there is a God, what kind of God is it that is behind this stranger than Oz world that we inhabit, that we can say is both wise and good, but also is participating in what's happening in history, but also where history looks the way that it does, so screwed up. This is a very difficult thing to sort out, this being human business. And the Bible is offering the most profound contribution and pointing us to someone who's just this perpetual surprise of a gift of a human, and who is more than a human, and of course that's the person of Jesus. And when you begin to see the Bible in this way and learn how to read it the way that it's been designed to be read, dude, there aren't enough early mornings in the rest of your days to wake up and read this thing and get lost in its pages. At least that's how clock's ticking. I turned 40. And I might have asked how many mornings I might have left on average, and I'm pretty sure I'm not even going to get my head around the whole thing, and that's okay. I'll just talk to Jesus about it one day. But it's another switch. You'll go to the Bible seeing what you expect to see. And the resources we're creating are trying to help people see we're in the presence of a sage master communicator, if we're willing to look for one.
Yeah, so the Bible is human and divine. It's literary genius. And, Tim has been able to study under a lot of brilliant people who have helped him create that paradigm. And I've been able to work with Tim. And hopefully these videos will help you see that. The Read Scripture videos go through the literary structure of the books. The theme videos show how the Bible is one story and it weaves together, and how these motifs are kind of like stitched into the fabric of the story, how they build. And so if this sounds like, that sounds cool, but I have no idea what they're talking about, That's a great place to start, to get the bearings. And we'll talk about that more later. But the third, human and divine, literary genius, the third paradigm that has been helpful for me in the re-enchantment of the Bible is that the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus. We talk about this a lot, and it's been a pillar of the Bible Project. The Bible is one story, and everything has its climax in Jesus. We live in a really cool time in human history. I mean, like a really remarkable time in human history. Like, we send rockets to space. We send people in rockets to space. Like, we live like kings and queens down here on Earth, like more than any other people. Like, this is remarkable. There's also a lot of really horrible stuff happening. But think of, I mean, in my pocket is a computer that tells me anything I want to know. Like, this is a remarkable time to be alive. And largely because of empiricism in science, in the scientific revolution, and being able to categorize things and tell you what things are and how things work and make sense of the world that way. And empiricism is great at that. We can all agree, because we're going to go sleep on a really comfortable mattress. Like, we know what that means. But what empiricism and science is not good at is telling us why something matters. The thing that we have as humans to tell us why something matters is stories. That's what we use. We tell stories to get to what's the meaning of something. You want to know how something works? You go to a handbook. You want to know what something means? You tell a story. And that's what we've had for human history. And remarkably, the Bible is largely stories and some poetry, which is also about finding the meaning in things. And it's this one, and it's not just all these different stories. It's one unified story of all these authors talking to each other and building out a story of what it means to be human, and what it means to live well, and what to do with the power God's given us. And what's surprising about the story of the Bible is how the Apostle John puts it, is that the meaning of the story, the logos, became a human. The story all of a sudden like came down to earth to hang out with us as a human, Jesus. So there's a story that's alive, that came to life in a remarkable way, and lived a life and died and then defeated death into new life. And this whole story builds up to this man in his life, death, and resurrection, and all the themes and every aspect in surprising ways and beautiful ways. And it seems like every single video we make is just another way to look at how the story does that. Bible is one unified story that leads to Jesus.
Yeah, I suppose if we were to have an epitaph on our tombstones, I think I might want it to be something like that. My contribution to the human race, just to remind people of something that was always true, but somehow we forget. It's a simple sentence. The implications of it are so significant. 7 years is what I spent in local church ministry, preaching and teaching, and it's not like as long as some of you, but it's long enough to understand how local church life works. And I think the challenge within the life cycles and the seasons and structures of a local church is that it's so easy in the name of efficiency or in the name of our structures to treat the Bible towards some other end, to treat the Bible as inspirational literature that gets the people to move the vision forward. It's really easy to want to treat the Bible as if its main purpose is like self-help literature, right? So it's like 3 tips for dealing with difficult situations, or it's 5 tips for the more fulfilled life. Are you with me? that's very easy, and nobody sets out with bad intentions. The book's crazy. I mean, what do you do with this thing? And so, well, we're trying to help people in our church, and we have this amount of time with them. Okay, let's do, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, we're trying to make it work. And so the most difficult thing I find is to, like, stop my agenda and stop all my debates, like all the questions I have about really important things, about whatever, how, right, creation and evolution and historical Adam and end time stuff and Holy Spirit stuff. Because here's what will happen is that you'll like read into those debates and you'll stake out your claim or where you stand on an issue because you've studied these biblical passages, but then you think you know those passages. You don't know those passages because you actually, odds are, you didn't spend as much time reading, right, the Four Reviews book as you did just reading that whole literary work in which that one paragraph that you pillaged fits in, right? And just spend your time immersing yourself in the whole flow of the whole letter. Are you with me? And so it's the most difficult thing, but I'm convinced it's the thing that we must learn how to do, is to learn how to listen to the Bible with no agenda and just hear it. And I don't know how to say it. I'll share some stuff at the next session, but when I stop bringing my needs and my agenda and I listen patiently to what the Bible's doing, it's telling me the story. And it's actually telling me that there are questions I ought to be asking that I never even would think to ask. And then it's giving me answers to all these things that I hadn't asked, but I realized, like, oh my gosh, that's probably the most important question, is that I start asking that one. And all of a sudden, you find that the Bible starts enchanting you and messing with you and messing with your views of power and influence and of your body and of your resources and your money and your relationships. And then Jesus starts messing with you because he's the most perfect expression of how the whole story works, the logic of the whole story. But it's the most difficult thing I think we'll ever do, especially if you live within the rhythms of local church ministry. But it's my conviction that if you and I and the Bible are going to be partners, and if we're going to sit under this story, we need to learn how to listen to it without our agendas setting the stage. And so that's another aim of what we're doing. The Bible Project, we kind of set out to make something that didn't quite exist because we wished it existed for us. And, it was it was a bit of a risk because it's like, well, nobody thinks that they need this because nobody else is quite making this. So we're going to create something that people aren't quite aware that it's what they need. And we'll see what happens. And so we're still seeing what happens. But that's our goal, you guys. Jesus is so beautiful, and he's the culmination of the whole thing. And to be able to learn how to see it as a unified story, it will change your life, and change how you think about everything. At least that's what it's been doing to us. And the Bible Project is a way that we can help share that with you all. So I know there's actually a lot of people who are here down in the Bay Area that have been supporters of what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
So we knew there's a high density of you in the room. You guys, thank you.
Yeah,
you're the
thanks so
backbone
much.
of what we're doing, and
Yeah,
we're really grateful. We just wanted to share about our stories and the things we've been learning. And cheers. Thanks for having us here, you guys.